Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hey there.
We're jumping into a really interesting collection of sources today. These were curated by the Pythonist programmer. She's a software engineering consultant. And these are the things that caught her eye this past week, roughly June 1st through June 8th, 2025.
Yeah, it's quite a mix. We've got articles, some research, even some notes covering everything from, AI developments to the human side of work and life.
Mm-hmm. And also shifts in branding and marketing, plus some really critical stuff around digital safety and, well, our rights online.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. And that's exactly what we're here to do. We'll guide you through this material, pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising facts, and try to connect the dots for you.
Think of it as a shortcut, yeah. Helping you get informed on these really fast-moving topics without having to read everything yourself.
Exactly. We're not just reading summaries. We want to explore why this stuff matters and what you can actually take away from it.
Right. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with AI. That seems to be everywhere. And the first thing that really stands out from these sources is, well, it feels like a pretty dramatic shift in how AI leaders are talking.
Tell me about it.
It wasn't long ago, we heard a lot of calls for caution, people saying, regulate us, please, before things get out of hand.
Yeah, that was the narrative for a while. Safety first.
But now, it feels like the pendulum has swung hard the other way. The dominant message seems to be, unleash us, let us run.
That's a really significant pivot, and it happened fast. The sources actually offer some context for why this might be happening. Well, one points pretty strongly to geopolitical factors. The whole global political climate, maybe the potential return of figures like Trump being mentioned.
Okay.
And this intense focus on winning the quote-unquote AI race, especially against China. The feeling seems to be that heavy regulation could slow down innovation, make us less competitive.
So the drive to win globally is maybe overriding some of those earlier safety concerns?
It looks that way, at least in some powerful circles. The implication is, less enthusiasm for really robust safety rules and a bigger push for something they're calling freedom to learn.
Freedom to learn. That sounds interesting. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, it's not just a vague concept. The source ties it directly to the idea of redefining copyright law specifically for AI training data.
Whoa. Okay, that's huge.
Right. It basically suggests that AI models should have the freedom to learn from vast data sets.
Which probably include tons of copyrighted material, books, art, code, everything.
Exactly. And potentially without needing the usual permissions or, compensating the original creators.
That's a massive point of tension, isn't it? I mean, how does an AI's freedom to learn stack up against the rights of the people whose work is being used to train it?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, really. It challenges the whole foundation of creative industries and ownership.
And it's not like everyone in the AI world is on board with this shift either, is it?
No, definitely not. The source specifically mentions Anthropic as kind of a lone voice among the big players, still really pushing for strong safety guardrails.
So even within the industry, there's disagreement.
For sure. It shows there's an internal struggle happening, too. But the main takeaway seems to be this dramatic reversal on regulation, maybe fueled by global competition, and it's forcing these really fundamental questions about copyright and data use.
Okay, so from the big picture politics, let's maybe zoom in a bit.
Yeah.
What about the tech itself? How are these things actually running?
Yeah, let's get into the technical weeds. One source gives us a peek inside the machine, looking at the realities of running these big AI models at scale.
This gets into the practical side, right? Using details from that DeepSeek source.
Exactly. It explains that even when these models are running on super powerful hardware, the process inference, generating the text or code, it's not like a perfectly smooth, continuous flow.
Right. It happens in steps, doesn't it? Like sequential stages. The source called them ticks.
Yeah, ticks or clock cycles, stages of processing. And because deep learning models have all these layers, the step-by-step processing can actually create bottlenecks.
Oh.
The source introduces this idea of a pipeline bubble. Imagine the model is like an assembly line with many stations, layers. A bubble happens when you don't have enough pieces of data or tokens to fill every station in the line simultaneously.
So like some workers on the assembly line are just standing there with nothing to do because the batch of parts wasn't big enough.
Precisely. And those idle stations lead to an inefficient drain phase at the end where the pipeline isn't full. The source says these bubbles can be absolutely brutal for overall throughput, how many requests the system can handle efficiently.
Okay, so how do they deal with that?
To avoid these bubbles, the inference providers, the companies running the models, tend to set their collection windows wider.
Meaning they wait longer?
Yeah, they wait a bit longer to gather more tokens from different user requests coming in before they start processing a batch.
Ah, okay. So that helps keep the assembly line full and the hardware busy.
Right. Better utilization.
But that waiting time adds to the delay I experience when I ask the AI something, right? That initial pause before it starts typing.
Exactly. That little bit of latency isn't always just the computer thinking. Sometimes it's the system strategically waiting to collect enough work to run efficiently and avoid those costly bubbles.
That's interesting. So even with tons of people using it at once, it's still hard to keep the GPUs perfectly busy all the time.
Surprisingly, yes, because each individual request still has to go through all those layers sequentially. You can process many requests in parallel batches, but filling those batches perfectly is the challenge.
And the source mentioned trying to split the work, like
Mhm.
doing different parts of the calculation on different chips.
Yeah, the idea of splitting things like the attention mechanism and the feed-forward networks, you'd think that would speed things up, right? More parallel processing.
Seems logical.
But it's technically really tricky. The big hurdle mentioned is memory overhead.
Memory overhead.
Yeah, if you split the calculation, you need a lot of extra memory, like temporary storage space, to hold the intermediate results from one part before sending them to the next.
Like needing big holding areas between stations on that assembly line.
Good analogy. And if you're moving data between different GPUs, you're constantly shuffling these intermediate results and model weights back and forth, which adds its own complexity and delay.
So it's not as simple as just throwing more hardware at it. There are fundamental challenges in how the data flows.
Pretty much. The takeaway is that running these huge AI models efficiently at scale involves some serious engineering gymnastics to manage sequential processing, avoid those pipeline bubbles, and deal with memory constraints. That apparent magic has a lot of complex plumbing behind it.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's shift back a bit to how AI might actually change things for us, like in our jobs.
Right. One source talks about a really cool development, integrating physical laws directly into deep learning models.
Physics. How does that help AI?
Well, by teaching the AI the known rules of the physical world, like how fluids move or how weather systems work, you can make it more efficient and accurate for specific tasks.
Ah, so it doesn't have to learn everything from scratch just by looking at data. It has some built-in understanding of how the world works.
Exactly. And the source gives real-world examples where this is already making a difference. Things like improving traffic flow predictions or making climate science modeling faster and more reliable.
That's fascinating. And does this lead to a different view of AI's role?
It does. It feeds into this vision presented in the source where AI isn't necessarily coming to replace human experts like scientists or creatives.
But more like an assistant.
Yes, a digital lab assistant is the phrase used. The idea is that AI takes on the more tedious, repetitive parts of the job.
The drudgery, as one source put it, like processing huge data sets or running endless simulations.
Precisely, freeing up the human expert to focus on the more complex, creative, or strategic aspects.
Okay, so if AI handles the routine knowledge work, what's left for humans?
This is where the concept of wisdom work comes in, introduced as the essential human counterpoint.
Wisdom work. I like the sound of that. What does it involve?
This source defines it by skills that are uniquely human, things AI just can't replicate right now. We're talking about emotional clarity, discernment, judgment, building relationships, asking the right questions, understanding nuance.
So this stuff that requires intuition, social understanding, ethical judgment, maybe even empathy.
You got it. The deep human capacities.
Yeah.
And here's the kicker. The source says major tech companies are already seeing this shift.
Really? What are they doing?
They're not just rolling out AI tools, they're actively investing in training their own people for this wisdom work era. They recognize that these human skills are becoming even more valuable.
That's a huge insight for anyone listening. In a world increasingly filled with AI-generated information and automation, your ability to exercise judgment, connect with people, understand context, and apply wisdom, that's your differentiator. That's what becomes premium.
Absolutely. Companies are focusing on it because that's what they'll need to navigate the future successfully.
Speaking of companies navigating this, let's talk about those AI memos. It seems like every CEO is sending one out lately.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a phenomenon. One source calls them cultural artifacts, which I think is a great description.
Like snapshots of how organizations are grappling with this huge change in real time.
Exactly. And they mostly follow a similar script, right? The basic plot is AI is here, it's transformative, we have to adapt. Our future depends on it.
Yeah, the core message is pretty consistent. But the way they say it, the tone seems to vary wildly.
Hugely. The source gives some great examples of the different emotional registers.
Like who?
Well, you've got Will England, the CEO of Walleye Capital. His memo sounds almost religious in its fervor. Calls AI a magical elixir, says it makes you 20% smarter instantly.
Wow.
And he basically says if you're not using these tools, it's like refusing the internet back in '95. He literally uses the word dumb. It's very intense, very rah-rah.
Okay, that's one end of the spectrum. What else?
Then you have Micah Kaufman at Fiverr. His memo starts with, and I'm quoting loosely here, AI is coming for your jobs. Heck, it's coming for mine too.
Whoa, that's blunt.
Super blunt. Radical candor, right. He even suggests employees might need to go scream hard in front of the mirror to really get it. It's meant to create immediate, maybe even slightly terrifying, urgency.
Definitely a different approach. And others fall somewhere in between.
Yeah, Shopify's Toby Lidke is mentioned as being more philosophical. Box's Aaron Levy is more pragmatic, focusing on eliminating drudgery. And it's interesting, Duolingo's Luz von Ahn apparently adjusted his initially measured tone after some pushback, which shows how tricky this messaging can be.
So the tone reflects the company culture and maybe the CEO's personality. What about the actual strategies? How are they trying to get employees on board?
Also very different. Shopify is weaving AI into everything, performance reviews, requiring proof you can't automate before hiring, making teams explore AI in prototypes. They're chasing those 100x productivity gains.
So embedding it structurally.
Right. Walleye Capital, the enthusiastic one, they're gamifying it. Leaderboards, bounties for cool AI uses, cash prizes, weekly meetups, making it a fun, visible competition.
Interesting. And Fiverr, the blunt one.
Their focus seems more on individual transformation and, frankly, survival. One-on-one talks, pushing people to become prompt engineers or develop unique AI leveraging talents. The framing is stark. Adapt or potentially face a career change fast.
It's also interesting what these memos don't always include, right?
Yeah, the source points out that specific traditional business metrics like we expect X% productivity gain by Q3 are often missing. The focus right now seems more on driving activity, usage, adoption, getting the cultural shift going, rather than nailing down the precise ROI just yet.
Which makes sense. It's still early days for measuring this stuff, but it shows the push is driven by a mix of belief, competitive fear, and maybe some uncertainty about the exact outcomes. So, for you listening, if your company is going through this AI moment, maybe you've got the memo, maybe it's just starting, how do you navigate this?
That's the key question. The source suggests trying to figure out the underlying anxiety behind your CEO's message. Is it mostly fear of competitors? A drive for internal efficiency? Or maybe a deeper worry about the company's survival?
And knowing that helps you respond.
Exactly. If it's competition, you show how AI helps you differentiate or innovate. If it's efficiency, you demonstrate how you're using AI to multiply your impact, do more with less. If it's survival, you focus on how AI enhances your uniquely human, irreplaceable skills.
And it sounds like the really valuable people right now are the ones who can connect the dots, bridge that gap between the high-level executive vision and the practical stuff on the ground.
Absolutely. Being a translator, taking a vague mandate like we need AI transformation, and turning it into concrete actions, processes, and results in your own work, that's incredibly valuable.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit now and talk more about the human element in all this change. One source uses Stack Overflow as a really interesting case study.
Yeah, Stack Overflow. It started out so brilliantly, didn't it? It captured the energy, the collaboration of the developer community. It was all about human interaction solving problems together.
It really was revolutionary. But then, things went downhill. What happened, according to the source?
It wasn't one single thing, but the source argues it was primarily internal factors. The way the community moderated itself became kind of rigid, even oppressive sometimes, and leadership made choices that, over time, seemed to chip away at the very things that made it special.
So it wasn't AI that killed it, because that's the common narrative you hear.
That's the crucial point the source makes. No, AI didn't kill Stack Overflow. The rise of tools like ChatGPT just sort of exposed the cracks that were already there. It highlighted how much of that original community spark had already faded, how it had become more transactional for many.
That makes sense. And it connects to a bigger idea about why people create things, right?
Yeah.
The music analogy.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Even if AI could write perfect symphonies, humans would still make music. Think about it. Bach, Beethoven, the Beatles, didn't stop people from wanting to create and share their own music.
Right.
And for many developers, coding is like that. It's not just a job, it's a creative act, something intrinsically rewarding, challenging, joyful even. Coding for coding's sake, the source calls it.
So the worry is that if AI completely takes over the bulk of coding, does it risk becoming more like a niche hobby, like, handcrafted furniture in an age of IKEA? Still valuable, still beautiful, but not the central way most things are built anymore.
That's a provocative thought. So what would it take for a platform like Stack Overflow to regain its footing?
The source suggests a fundamental shift back to believing in human programmers and their culture, really centering the mission on supporting the human side of software development, not just being a repository of answers.
So the lesson is broader than just Stack Overflow, isn't it? Absolutely. Platforms built for humans need genuine community, that human spark. Just having content or utility isn't enough in the long run. Neglecting the human element is risky business.
From online communities to the complexity within ourselves, several sources dive into this idea of neurocomplexity.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff. It often connects experiences of being identified as gifted in childhood with how things unfold later in life.
And it's not just about being smart, right? The sources, especially that workbook, paint a much more complex picture.
Exactly. They argue that neurocomplex brains often involve an intersection of high intellectual ability and neurodivergence. Things like autism, ADHD, anxiety, maybe sensory sensitivities, often all intertwined.
So brilliant and intense and maybe wired differently all at the same time, defying simple labels.
Totally. And this complexity can lead to what the sources call quiet crises in adulthood for those former gifted kids.
Quiet crises, like what?
Things like hidden shame, feeling like you always have to be perfect or have it all together. Dealing with unrealistic expectations, both internal and external. And finding it really hard to be vulnerable or ask for help. Maybe because you were always seen as the capable one.
That sounds incredibly isolating.
It can be. The sources stress that healing and actually thriving means embracing the whole picture, the strengths and the vulnerabilities, without shame, without trying to reduce yourself to fit a simpler box.
The workbook had that powerful idea of the neurocomplex brain not being a flaw, but a different kind of lens.
Yeah, a lens that sees more, feels more, questions more, which can be amazing, but also really disorienting in a world that often pushes for simplicity and conformity.
So understanding this complexity is key. It's an act of self-compassion, really.
Exactly. Moving beyond labels to understand your unique wiring is the first step towards building a life and finding support that actually fits.
Let's zoom in on one specific aspect of this neurocomplexity: monotropism.
Right. Monotropism. It's often talked about with autism, but the source suggests it applies more broadly to many neurocomplex people, including those with ADHD who experience hyperfocus. It's basically a tendency to focus very intensely, often narrowly, on one thing at a time, creating attention tunnels.
Attention tunnels. So focus isn't like a spotlight you can easily swing around. It's more like a deep river current.
That's a great way to put it. And because it's a deep current, interruptions are incredibly disruptive.
Yeah, I can imagine. If you get pulled out of that deep flow.
It takes real time and mental energy to get back into it. If you're constantly being interrupted or asked to switch tasks, you might never reach that state of deep productive focus at all.
Which is basically the opposite of how many workplaces are set up, right? Constant meetings, notifications, multitasking.
Exactly. Traditional workplaces often feel designed for shallow engagement, which is really tough for monotropic brains.
So what do monotropic individuals need in a work environment, according to the source?
The list includes things like minimizing task switching, reducing noise, both actual sound and cognitive clutter like constant pings, having dedicated space and time for deep attention, clear communication that doesn't require endless back and forth chat, and flexibility in how and when they communicate.
Okay, that makes sense. And this leads to that, well, the source calls it a crazy idea.
Yeah, crazy by conventional standards, maybe. The idea is, what if we paid neurocomplex people primarily for their cognitive horsepower, their ability to do that deep, focused work instead of just paying them for meeting attendance?
How will it work?
The proposal is pretty radical. Let them skip most meetings. Let them use AI-generated summaries to catch up on what they missed. Let them engage and respond when it works best for them, preserving those precious focus tunnels.
And the thinking is you'd actually get better output from them because their focus isn't constantly being broken.
It's the bet. Protect the focus tunnel, get the strong results.
But what about connection? Wouldn't they feel isolated skipping all the meetings?
The source tackles that head on. The argument is that real belonging comes from psychological safety and feeling accepted for who you are, not just from being physically present in every meeting. Allowing them to connect on their own terms, when it doesn't derail their deep work, might actually foster more genuine connection and belonging.
So the core idea is respect the way different brains work, trust the horsepower, build systems that adapt to people, not the other way around.
Exactly. Stop fighting the brain's natural processing style and start leveraging it.
To help understand this journey over time, there's also that neurocomplex lifespan model and the workbook.
Right. That model tries to map out the whole subjective experience, school, work, social life, health, identity, existential stuff for neurocomplex individuals.
And it connects that childhood giftedness label to later in life autism or ADHD identification, right? Using that umbrella term, neurocomplexity.
Yeah. The workbook encourages looking back. In early childhood, were there signs of a spiky profile? Really advanced in some areas, maybe lagging a bit in others. Social, motor, cognitive skills developing unevenly.
Then in the school years, maybe 6 to 12, that's often when gifted gets identified, sometimes separated from peers. But being good at academics might hide struggles elsewhere.
And this is often when early masking starts trying to fit in. Anxiety or those big existential questions might pop up but get brushed aside because, hey, the grades are good. Maybe early inklings of feeling different in terms of gender, too.
Then comes adolescence and young adulthood, like 13 to 25. The model calls this a fork in the road.
Yeah, two main paths emerge. One is the successful teen who becomes the successful adult, hitting all the conventional milestones, getting praise.
But inside,
Often feeling unfulfilled, anxious, maybe depressed. Chronic health issues can increase from the stress of masking and not having the right support. Sometimes unhealthy coping mechanisms develop, like substance use or disordered eating.
okay, what's the other path?
The outsider teen to outsider adult. This is someone who recognizes they don't quite fit the mold and chooses less traditional paths, maybe in work, education, lifestyle.
Existentially, that might feel more aligned.
Right, more authentic. But it comes with external challenges, less societal validation, maybe financial pressure. The chronic health stuff might still be there, but authenticity is prioritized. This path might also involve more open exploration of gender or sexual fluidity.
And people can switch paths later on.
The model suggests the successful path is more common initially, but some might shift towards an outsider approach later, maybe after burnout forces a reckoning.
Which brings us to early adulthood, 26 to 39. Another fork.
Yeah, continuing those paths. Pressures mount career, family, finances. This often leads to burnout, more intense masking, maybe relying more heavily on those coping mechanisms. There's also a mention of an outsider teen who manages to achieve conventional success as an adult, but maybe by suppressing parts of themselves, like their identity.
And then middle adulthood, 40 to 65 plus.
This stage is often marked by significant burnout phase 1. Just deep exhaustion from years of trying to fit in and cope without the right understanding or support.
And that burnout often leads to
Phase 2. Adult identification of ADHD and or autism. Getting that diagnosis or identification later in life can be a massive turning point. Suddenly, lifelong patterns make sense. It's described as a crucial step towards self-integration. The sources mention screening tools like R or CAT-EQ as ways to start exploring, but emphasize they aren't a substitute for a professional evaluation.
So identification isn't the end point, it's a beginning.
Exactly. The final stage onward, which can happen at any age after identification or self-understanding, is about finding true alignment, reconnecting with your core self, honoring your needs for meaning and purpose.
Which means actively managing things.
Yeah, finding that ongoing balance. Rest, movement, managing sensory input, finding the right mix of connection and solitude. The workbook lists concrete things like finding affirming therapy, mapping your specific wiring, making space for play, connecting with nature, using sensory tools, setting boundaries, maybe unmasking safely, and aligning with your gender or sexual identity.
Wow. It's a whole journey.
It really is. And the workbook concludes by saying that understanding this path isn't about fixing yourself, it's about self-compassion, remembering, reclaiming, and reorienting towards who you truly are.
That's powerful. Okay, let's shift from that deep internal journey to something a bit more practical day-to-day, like getting dressed for work when you work from home.
Ah, yes, the WFH uniform. One source had a fun take on this.
It's all about comfort, right? Described as self-love And a distinct lack of hard pants.
Definitely anti-hard pants. The author lays out a very specific 5-minute Zoom-ready routine, low effort, high impact.
Okay, break it down for us.
Quick hair fix, maybe just the front pieces with something like a Dyson Airwrap. Minimal makeup, just a touch of something clean like Kosas or Say to look fresh. Simple jewelry like gold hoops or a claw clip for the hair. And then the secret weapon. One key piece of clothing.
And that key piece is?
The Left on Friday getaway button-down. It's a linen shirt. The author raves about its versatility. Looks polished enough for calls, even if it's a bit rumpled. But it's comfy enough to wear all day, maybe even as a beach cover-up later.
Nice. The ultimate blend of comfort and presentability.
Exactly. The source also mentions other comfy staples like specific sweats or even jeans that feel like sweatpants. The point is, WFH life has created this need for clothes that feel good but can be camera-ready in seconds.
Makes sense. But even in comfy clothes at home, workplace dynamics still exist, especially the manager-employee relationship.
Oh, yeah. Another source dives into that with a pretty blunt message. Your manager is not your best friend.
Ooh, okay. Why not? It seems natural to want to vent to your manager sometimes, especially if you like them and think they're good at their job.
It does feel natural, and honestly, the source points out it can be subtly flattering for a manager to hear complaints from their team. It makes them feel like the trusted confidant.
But that's bad.
The source argues it's organizational poison because when a manager commiserates with a direct report about, say, another team or person, they are implicitly validating that employee's potentially biased viewpoint.
Ah, okay, so builds little factions, undermines trust between teams.
Exactly. It prevents real problem solving because people aren't getting the full picture or developing empathy for other teams' perspectives.
So what's the difference between a manager and a best friend in this context?
It comes down to empathy. A best friend offers unconditional sympathy. They're on your side no matter what. A manager's empathy has to be conditional.
Conditional.
Yeah. Their job is to seek the truth, balance everyone's needs. The source uses the analogy of getting a team up Mount Everest, even if they don't all like each other, and make sure the whole organization works together towards its goals.
Okay, so how should managers handle employee complaints or vents without falling into that commiseration trap?
The source gives some practical tips. Act like a scientist, ask clarifying questions, dig deeper, recognize that situations are rarely black and white, and maybe the employee complaining is part of the problem. Be a perspective creator. Help the employee see things from the other side. Explain the pressures or incentives the other team might be facing that can lower the temperature.
Like being a good therapist.
Sort of. Validate the feeling. I hear you're frustrated. But gently question the facts or interpretation. Is that actually how it works? Or why might they be doing that?
And managers should watch their own language, too.
Definitely. Avoid saying things like, "Ugh, I don't know why they always do that." Assume positive intent from other teams to model empathy. Use neutral decision frameworks about roles and objectives instead of getting personal.
And watch the nonverbals. Like eye rolling.
Crucial. An eye roll or a sympathetic head nod can signal agreement just as much as words and be really toxic.
So what do you do if an employee is genuinely upset about a real problem?
Address the issue, not the team. Say, okay, let me look into that process. Not, yeah, that team is always messing up. If it's something really bad, acknowledge it. I understand this is a problem. I'll handle it. But shut down the venting itself. Keep it focused and unemotional.
So venting is okay, just not with your boss.
Pretty much. The source advises saving the commiseration for peers who don't report to the same manager. Keep those reporting lines clean. It's about maintaining professional boundaries for the health of the whole team and organization.
That leads nicely into another concept from the sources, stigmergy, and how it connects to the banality of evil.
Yeah, stigmergy. It sounds complicated, but the basic idea is simple. It's indirect coordination through traces left in the environment.
Like ants leaving pheromone trails.
Exactly. One ant leaves a trail, the next ant finds it easier to follow that trail than forge a new one, reinforcing it for the next ant, and so on. A path emerges without direct communication.
And humans do this too.
All the time. Think about walking on a worn path across a lawn instead of the paved sidewalk. Or adopting popular slang or memes, following trends. It often takes less mental effort and feels less socially risky to follow a path others have already made. And when you follow it and get rewarded, social acceptance clicks, whatever you strengthen that path.
Okay, I see that. How does Hannah Arendt's banality of evil connect?
Barnes' point about the Holocaust was that many horrific acts weren't necessarily driven by deep-seated personal hatred, but enabled by bureaucratic structures and systems that made complicity easy. People followed the established paths or pheromones, career advancement, following orders, social conformity, without deeply questioning the morality. It was a kind of mechanical complicity.
So the source is drawing a parallel,
Yeah.
saying that modern systems can act like those pheromone trails.
Right. Organizational structures, workplace norms, social media algorithms, they can subtly guide our behavior by making certain actions, viewpoints, or choices easier, less risky, or more rewarding than others.
So we might end up following these digital or social trails without really making a conscious, deliberate choice. We just drift along the path of least resistance.
That's the idea. Stigmergy helps us understand how systems, not just individual intentions, shape collective behavior, sometimes nudging us in directions good or bad, simply because the path has been laid out and reinforced. It's a call to be aware of those invisible influences.
Okay, let's completely switch gears now. Brand strategy. There's a trend emerging called trash talk marketing.
Exactly what it sounds like. Brands publicly taking shots at their competitors.
Like actually calling them out.
Sometimes directly, sometimes more subtly. The source uses a great recent example from the NBA playoffs involving Converse and Adidas.
Oh yeah, what happened?
Converse put out this marketing piece targeting Adidas athlete Anthony Edwards, whose nickname is Ant-Man. It was a video showing an ant getting stepped on.
Ouch.
And the caption was a clever play on Edwards' Adidas campaign slogan. It said, "Not hard to believe," riffing on Adidas's "Believe That." No direct tag, but everyone knew who it was aimed at.
Okay, that's pretty bold. Is this common?
It is in some industries, like soda wars or phone carriers constantly dissing each other. But it's been pretty rare in fashion or sportswear, where brands usually try to stay above it all, you know? Not very chic to trash talk.
But that's changing.
Seems like it. The source mentions Kiehl's making shady posts about Equinox after a partnership ended, Chemist Warehouse spoofing a Charlotte Tilbury ad, Nadam taking jabs at Quince, Denim Tears remixing Supreme logos to make a point.
Why now? What's driving this?
The source suggests it reflects the broader culture. Trash talk is just more accepted, even celebrated in some areas, like music. Kendrick Lamar winning a Grammy for a diss track is mentioned. It feels more authentic to some audiences now.
And why does it work for brands? What's the psychology?
Well, conflict grabs attention, right? It creates drama. It forces people to pick sides, us versus them, which can build strong loyalty and community around the brand doing the talking. It makes them look confident, maybe even dominant.
There was that seizing the narrative example, too. Carpet Company versus Mertra.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Mertra allegedly copied Carpet Company's viral video. So Carpet Company didn't just complain. They copied Mertra's copycat campaign to tell their side of the story and reclaim the original idea, using the competitor's tactic against them.
Clever. And it doesn't always have to be super direct.
No, sometimes it's subtle hints or inside jokes that only the in-the-know audience gets, spread through social media.
Is there a risk of going too far, though?
Definitely. The source says ideally it should spur healthy competition, make everyone better, not just tear the other down. Things like the brand's reputation, its market position, its relationship with the competitor, and whether it feels authentic, the Skechers example was noted, all play into whether it works or backfires.
And timing matters.
Hugely. You have to hit when the conversation is hot, when the moment is right to really ride the wave. The Puma Halliburton example showed what happens if you miss the timing.
So the takeaway is that brands are getting bolder, using conflict to cut through the noise, build community, and assert themselves, mirroring a broader cultural shift.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, why are consumers responding to this? Does it risk turning some people off?
It's definitely a high-risk, high-reward strategy.
Okay, from brand fights to brand safety, true crime podcasts. Huge genre, right?
Absolutely massive.
Well,
The source mentions staggering growth from under 7 million U.S. listeners in 2014 to over 19 million now. It's the third biggest podcast genre.
wow. But it's also ethically complicated, isn't it? The whole exploitation versus giving victims a voice debate.
Constantly. And that ethical gray area, plus the often graphic content, creates real brand safety headaches for advertisers. Who wants their happy product advertised right after a gruesome detail?
So is it hard for these podcasts to get advertisers?
Spotify's take, according to the source, is that yes, it's tricky for sensitive brands, but the overall podcast ad market's so big now there are more options, which actually makes true crime slots more competitive than you might think.
What's the big draw for advertisers then, despite the risks?
The audience, it's not just big, it's incredibly engaged. People who listen to true crime really listen. They dive deep into these complex stories. That level of immersion is very attractive to advertisers fighting for attention.
A marketing agency quoted, VML, basically said, if the audience demographics match your brand, you should consider it, regardless of the genre.
Pretty much. Obviously, some brands, like maybe Disney, would steer clear. But others, pharma, cars, maybe some retail might find it's a good fit for reaching their target consumer.
And the podcast hosts themselves, what's their view?
The hosts of the Clues podcast mention that the genre has endless material. And while they acknowledge the ethical concerns, they believe the very strong connection listeners form with the host is a huge selling point for brands, often strong enough to overcome hesitation about the content itself.
That deep listener loyalty translates to revenue.
Exactly. High immersion equals high value for the right advertiser.
So the insight is, true crime is ethically complex and risky for brands, but the audience is so large and engaged that advertisers are finding ways to navigate it, balancing the potential downsides against the huge opportunity. It really makes you think about how advertisers make those calls.
It's a tricky balance for sure.
Another brand navigating a specific audience challenge is Nike. According to one source, they might finally be cracking the code on connecting with women consumers.
Yeah, this has been a long struggle for Nike. Decades, really. They've tried things before, special websites, dedicated stores that didn't quite land. They faced criticism for lackluster products, maybe superficial marketing.
And importantly, issues with how they treated some of their star female athletes, right? Like Allison Felix, Simone Biles leaving the brand, plus that lingering boys club reputation internally.
All of that. But this current push, the source argues, feels different. It seems to be working.
What are they doing differently this time?
Several things. Really bold, visible marketing featuring top female athletes that Super Bowl ad, so win, with Clark, Wilson, Richardson. Their main Instagram feed is apparently dominated by women athletes and gear now.
Putting women front and center.
Exactly, and leaning hard into star power, especially A'ja Wilson. Her signature shoe, the A1 Pink Aura, sold out instantly. Nike supporting her beyond just shoes, book tour, fashion week, even a Lego partnership. And there's buzz about Caitlin Clark getting a shoe, too.
So, investing heavily in their female stars. What about behind the scenes?
Leadership changes seem key. Amy Montaigne moved up from GM of Women's to brand president. Other women are in top roles. The source notes more women representation overall in corporate and leadership positions globally, suggesting a real internal shift.
And product, are they still just shrinking and pinking it?
Doesn't sound like it. They have this athlete think tank listening directly to female athletes, which has led to specific innovations like maternity lines and leak protection shorts products addressing actual needs.
Partnerships, too, like the Skims collab.
Yeah. The Nike Skims partnership is highlighted as a strategic move to leverage Skims' strengths in inclusivity and fit, potentially disrupting the activewear market together.
And this is happening while Nike's overall business is struggling a bit.
Yeah, they're in their worst slump in years, apparently. So succeeding with women isn't just a nice to have, it's strategically crucial for their turnaround.
It sounds like they finally realized they couldn't just rely on sponsoring female athletes. They needed to change the whole go-to-market approach, the internal culture, the product itself.
That seems to be the argument. Competitors like Lululemon and Skims really ate their lunch for a while by offering more nuanced products and messaging that resonated better. Nike seems to have learned from that.
So the conclusion is, Nike's tried before, but this time feels more substantial, driven by leadership, athlete input, and smart partnerships.
That's the takeaway. The follow-through, as the source puts it, seems different this time. It raises interesting questions about how crucial female leadership and authentic athlete collaboration are in reaching female consumers today.
Okay, one more brand strategy story. Quince. They're known for affordable, luxury, direct-to-consumer stuff. What are they up to?
They're making a big play into beauty, specifically luxury skincare, but in an interesting way, using a marketplace model.
So not launching their own Quince skincare line.
Not yet, anyway. They've launched the Beauty Atelier by Quince on their website. It's basically a curated shop featuring high-end brands like Augustinus Bader, 111 Skin stuff, with price tags from like $115 up to $380.
Wow, that's a step up from their usual price points. And they don't handle the products themselves.
Right, key detail. The brands fulfill the orders directly. Quince is the storefront, the curator, but not the warehouse.
Why this approach? Why a marketplace?
The source positions it as a smart, gradual entry into a new competitive category. Partnering with established luxury brands helps Quince build credibility and trust with consumers in beauty much faster than if they just launched their own unknown line from scratch. It's part of their bigger goal to be a destination for quality essentials, even at higher price points.
And this fits into a broader retail trend.
Definitely. More and more retailers are adding marketplaces to compete with Amazon, which, interestingly, is the biggest beauty retailer in the US now. Nordstrom, Macy's, Ulta, they're all doing it.
What's the advantage for the retailer?
Scalability, mostly.
Yeah.
They can add tons of brands and products without taking on the inventory risk, the storage costs, the fulfillment hassle. Net-a-Porter switching its beauty to an affiliate model is mentioned as another example of shedding that inventory burden.
Are there downsides? Risks?
For sure. Brand image can be diluted, and if it's not carefully managed, you risk having unknown resellers or even counterfeit products on your platform, which is especially damaging in luxury.
How is Quince addressing that?
By keeping it curated and closed. Brands need approval to join. They're focusing only on established luxury prestige partners with higher price points, which naturally reduces some of that risk.
So this is just the start for Quince in premium beauty.
Looks like it. Expect more expansion into beauty and wellness from them.
The insight here is that the marketplace model is a powerful tool for retailers like Quince to enter new markets quickly, scale offerings, and reduce risk, mirroring a larger shift in e-commerce. It certainly changes the dynamics between brands and retailers.
It really does.
Okay, let's move into our final section. Digital rights, regulations, safety. Important stuff, starting with a quick point on cyber threats.
Yeah, just a brief mention in one source, but significant. It highlights the high cost of global cryptojacking hitting companies.
Cryptojacking.
Yeah.
That's where attackers secretly use your computers to mine cryptocurrency.
Exactly. And it's costing businesses real money. The key point the source makes is that these expensive attacks are often linked back to something fundamental, misconfigured DevOps practices.
So basic security hygiene in development and operations is still crucial.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even sophisticated attacks often exploit simple configuration errors. Good DevOps practices are a critical defense.
Okay, moving from infrastructure security to data rights. There's a big legal fight brewing over AI training data, copyright, and privacy, isn't there?
Oh yeah, it's heating up. The lawsuit Reddit filed against Anthropic is a perfect example.
What's Reddit's claim?
They're saying Anthropic scraped Reddit content, all those user posts and comments without permission to train their AI models, violating Reddit's rules and exploiting user data.
What's Reddit's stance on using their data?
They say they believe in an open internet, but that doesn't mean free rein for commercial exploitation, especially when AI companies are making billions off data created by Reddit users, Redditors, without compensation or respect for privacy.
Are they open to deals?
Yeah, they explicitly mention they prefer licensing deals, like the ones they have with OpenAI and Google. The lawsuit against Anthropic seems like a way to force them to negotiate.
And this isn't just Reddit versus Anthropic, right?
Sure.
It's part of a bigger trend.
Definitely. Meta, OpenAI, other big AI players are all facing lawsuits alleging they used copyrighted material, news articles, books, code without authorization to train their models.
The New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI and Microsoft is mentioned as one that's moving forward, seeking huge damages.
Exactly. And even the mention of a source about the Gray Lady's data dragnet hints at how these legal fights over data are also raising serious privacy concerns for AI users and platforms.
So the core issue is, who owns the data AI learns from? Do creators get compensated? What happens to user privacy? These are massive questions being fought out in court right now.
And the answers will fundamentally shape how AI develops from here on out.
Okay, now for perhaps the most provocative source, the egg yolk principle. What is that about?
It's a really compelling argument that human sexuality is incredibly adaptable and will always find ways to express itself. It's essentially outsmarting attempts by algorithms or politicians to control or suppress it.
How so? What are the examples?
The source uses these almost bizarre examples of things that become unintentionally sexualized online or get flagged boosted by algorithms, like close-ups of egg yolks breaking, certain mushroom videos, spitting, even just food prep filmed in a particular way.
Weird. So there's a paradox. Platforms ban explicit stuff.
Right. But the algorithms chasing engagement often end up promoting content that's just slightly off, ambiguously or uncomfortably sexual, because that stuff gets clicks and shares. It creates a weird incentive.
And this is happening against a backdrop of political efforts to crack down on sexual content.
Exactly. The source points to a significant push, mainly from the right in the U.S., to not just end pornography, but also to dramatically broaden the definition of what counts as pornographic. to include a much wider range of expression.
But the source argues these anti-porn laws don't really work.
The argument is they don't stop the industry. They mostly just shift power to politicians, restrict free speech, and harm not only adult creators and sex workers, but anyone creating or accessing any kind of sexual speech online.
Is there specific legislation they're worried about?
Yes, the proposed Interstate Obscenity Definition Act, or IODIA, from Senator Mike Lee, it aims to change the long-standing legal standard for obscenity, the Miller test, which considers community standards and artistic merit.
How would IODIA change it?
It would try to remove the intent part and define obscenity based on an objective intent to arouse, titillate, or gratify sexual desires.
Objective intent. That sounds subjective.
Exactly. That's the danger. Legal experts think it's unconstitutional, but given the current political climate, Project 2025 explicitly wants to end porn and jail creators, it's a serious concern. Such a vague standard could sweep up way more than just traditional porn. Romance novels on Book Talk, suggestive online content, mildly sexual scenes in movies, all potentially vulnerable.
And this connects to existing state laws, too.
Yeah, age verification laws often use incredibly broad definitions of harmful material based just on anatomy or sexual acts, regardless of context or intent.
The source mentions the chilling effect of past laws like Sesta Fosta.
Right. Those laws made platforms liable for user content, leading to widespread self-censorship and people using coded language like segs online to avoid filters.
And future laws like the Take It Down Act could make it worse.
Experts fear it could push platforms to ban all NSFW content just to avoid the massive liability and impossible moderation demands, causing a huge blow to free expression.
The role of banks and payment processors is also mentioned, acting as moral arbiters.
Yeah, they're restricting content based on their own rules, effectively acting as an extra legal arm of the right, enforcing certain moral standards outside the law. Patreon struggles with defining acceptable sexually gratifying works, like rules on human monster sex or armpit licking show how absurd it gets.
Wow. Armpit licking rules, okay?
It illustrates the contortions platforms go through. The source also mentions opacity, how some kink communities or creators intentionally remain hard to understand or categorize as a form of resistance, a right not to be easily labeled and censored.
So the bigger danger is that chipping away at obscenity definitions isn't just about porn.
It's about narrowing the scope of acceptable sexual expression overall, fitting it into restrictive norms. It mirrors things like book bans and attacks on LGBTQ+ rights, especially trans rights.
The core insight is stark. Attempts to legislate or algorithmically control sexuality create a chilling effect on free speech, even if the laws themselves aren't constitutional or ultimately passed. The intent itself does damage.
It's a powerful defense of expressive freedom and the resilience of human nature.
Yeah. Okay, that was a journey through a lot of different territory this week.
It really was.
We went from the strategic shifts in the AI industry to the deep complexities of our own minds and how we work, looked at how brands are fighting for attention with sometimes edgy tactics, and landed on these fundamental fights over digital rights and freedom of expression.
A lot of ground covered. Our goal, as always, was to distill the key insights from this stack of sources the Pythonist programmer flagged, hopefully giving you, our listener, a clearer picture of these important developments.
And you can really see the threads connecting them, can't you? How AI tech influences work, how understanding ourselves changes workplaces, how the digital world shapes communication, and how basic freedoms are being contested online.
It's all interconnected. These sources really highlight that.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for you to chew on, drawing from these themes of complexity, authenticity, and navigating systems.
Go for it.
Think about how much your own behavior, online and off, might be subtly guided by those pheromones we talked about, the algorithms nudging you, the unspoken rules at work, the expectations of society. Maybe the most radical act in this complex world is cultivating the self-awareness to know your own path, to understand your unique wiring, and to find ways to, as one source put it, respect the tunnel of your own focus, your own way of being, even when all the systems around you seem to be pushing you into a different, maybe simpler mold.
Find your signal in the noise. Stay authentic.
Exactly. Keep questioning, keep exploring. And thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone. #TechTag episode sources. AI reality check. Every CEO is writing the same AI memo. Here's what they're really saying. Why DeepSeek is cheap at scale but expensive to run locally. Improving deep learning with a little help from physics. The coming age of wisdom work. Human at the center. AI didn't kill Stack Overflow.
My guide to getting Zoom ready in 5 minutes. Your manager is not your best friend. The banality of the algorithm. Avoiding labor isn't lazy. Neurocomplexity and burnout. 7. Quiet crises. Former gifted kids often face in adulthood. Crazy idea, pay Neurocomplex for focus, not FaceTime. Let AI take notes. Neurocomplex lifespan model. Neurocomplex lifespan model workbook. Post-burnout autism ADHD diagnosis. A neurocomplex lifespan model. Rebellion against linear success. Is this all there is? 10 reasons gifted adults often feel unsatisfied. Emerging tech, real impact. Snowflake launches OpenFlow to tackle AI-era data ingestion challenges. Real-time analytics with StarTree Cloud and Apache Pinot. How to use the new Python installation manager tool for Python 3.14. How to use Marimo, a better Jupyter-like notebook system for Python. How to prettify command line output in Python with Rich. Disney layoffs cut across TV, film, corporate finance, affecting hundreds of employees. Wells Fargo no longer faces Federal Reserve's 2018 asset cap. Digital safety and ethics, the high cost of misconfigured DevOps. Global cryptojacking hits enterprises, the high cost of misconfigured DevOps. Reddit sues Anthropic, says AI company exploited user data. The high cost of misconfigured DevOps. The Gray Ladies data dragnet, how one court order just nuked ChatGPT privacy. The egg yolk principle. Human sexuality will always outsmart prudish algorithms and hateful politicians. Security news this week. A hacker may have deep-faked Trump's chief of staff in a phishing campaign. Security news this week. TSA working on haptic tech to feel your body in virtual reality. Security news this week. Brand stewardship and visibility. Security news this week. How to master the art of trash talk marketing. Security news this week. In the world of true crime podcasting, brand safety is scary stuff. Security news this week. Is Nike finally winning with women? Security news this week. Quince enters the beauty marketplace. Security news this week. Why blockbuster deals are back in fashion. Security news this week. Global tech politics. Security news this week. Trump wants to erase queer history. This unconventional book club is fighting back.